In Mark Swilling, Professor of Sustainable Development and Co-Director of the Centre for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University, also, of course, a member of the National Planning Commission. Prof, thank you so much for your time this evening. What's your response to the resignation of Andre de Ruyter, and do you think it's going to make a big difference?
Speaking in my academic capacity, I think it is going to make a massive difference. I think, as Chris Yelland has said, that top team has been through hell and back and have done a heroic job in keeping the Eskom system going under extremely difficult conditions in the wake of corruption, of sabotage, aging power stations, inefficiencies. They were handed a poison chalice in 2020, and under the circumstances, I think they actually have done very well. What they lacked was political support.
Yes, and it's interesting what Chris Yelland was saying, and in fact also Kasatu when I spoke to Sizwe Pamela earlier. And they're saying, look, the problem is not a CEO issue. The problem is a political will issue. The extraordinary statements that came from Gwede Mantashe last week, Energy Minister, saying load shedding is worse than state capture, and basically accusing Andre de Ruyter of treason, that by allowing the situation to continue, it was tantamount to treason. What is going on, in your view, in terms of the political response to this? Because we have seen the president in July, he set up the Electricity Crisis Committee. You're on record as saying those plans are actually quite good. And yet we seem to see a political, I don't know if it's a failure, I don't know if it's a mismatch. What is your understanding of the problem?
Well, the significance of the president's statement in July was that he actually supported the Eskom management team and leadership. And that was a very significant part of that statement. Contrast that with what the response was to Gwede Mantashe's accusation that Eskom is plotting the overthrow of the state. Nobody of significance at the high political level contradicted that. And none of the cabinet ministers and the president and the board of Eskom didn't either come out with a statement to say, this is not what Eskom is doing. And so there has been a shift in the way in which the different groupings within the political leadership are responding to the electricity crisis. And I think there are quite a few who are looking for a fall guy, for somebody to blame. And this is what we're witnessing. It's going to make the energy crisis much, much worse. And anybody who steps into Andre de Ruyter's shoes is not going to be able to do anything different overnight because the problems are so deep and structural.
We have seen, obviously, so much turbulence around President Cyril Ramaphosa himself, around Phala, and just, was it last Thursday, we heard he was going to resign. We also heard that the person, one of the people who talked him out of that move was Gwede Mantashe. So one wonders, do you think that internal ANC politics and allegiances may have played a role around what's going on at Eskom?
I think the political leadership are fighting for their survival. The focus is on the ANC conference. There isn't a sense that there is sufficient urgency and focus on the recommendations coming out of the National Electricity Crisis Committee, because big, bold decisions are required to back up the Eskom team, to take over some of the debt, to set up the transmission company so that it can raise the finance to extend the grid, to accelerate the renewables program, rather than just what we saw last week, is a very small allocation. So there's a lot of big decisions that need to be made very quickly, including finding the money to buy diesel so that the diesel generators can kick in to keep the lights on while the machines get repaired.
I mean, we're sitting in stage 5 load shedding. We have not heard from Eskom for days. perhaps tonight's resignation explains why they've been so silent. Heidi Jokos has told us that we will hear from the board tomorrow lunchtime. But do you see us moving out of stage 5 load shedding anytime soon?
I think the stages 4, 5, and 6 are going to become the new normal, and we need to prepare for that. If you can diminish your dependence on the grid, do so. There are some very, very creative solutions. A company is installing solar into my place. It's not costing me a cent, and I'm going to have to just pay them a monthly fee less than my Eskom bill for 7 years, and the equipment's mine. These options are available. We need to protect ourselves, our businesses, our households. We need to protect ourselves now because things are going to get worse. Some of the big drivers of that is that unless you get new generation capacity on the grid, Eskom can't take the machines off the grid in order to thoroughly repair and rehabilitate them, which is not just a few days' work, it's months of work. And so we need at least 10 gigs of renewable energy onto the grid as fast as possible. But now we know that's not going to happen unless the grid itself is extended, because that's now the big blockage that is preventing this from happening.
Yeah, in fact, I was just going to ask you about that because that latest bid window news, those IPPs signed, it was only for 850 megawatts and it should have been around, I think, 4,000 megawatts. And that's because we need a huge amount of money to capacitate the grid to take on all this new energy. I mean, it's just the problems are just everywhere. What do you think? Who's actually in charge? Is the Electricity Crisis Committee doing anything at the moment? Who's coordinating it all? I wonder if you've got a sense of where the power is and whether there's any clear communication between the different elements involved in what brings power to this country.
Well, I think what we should do is start by saying that Eskom, with sufficient backing and sufficient support and autonomy, could have addressed the challenges. Instead, what has happened is, as the crisis has deepened, we've seen a proliferation of centers of power and execution in the DPME, Department of Public Enterprises, in Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, in the NECOC. And then when it comes to climate finance, we've seen the Presidential Climate Commission and the Presidential Task Team on Climate Finance, led by Daniel Manelli. So, all of those that I've referred to is a multiplicity of centers of energy, all in one way or another, trying to address the crisis. What Andre de Ruyter wanted when he came into power, came into leadership in 2020, was to say, let Eskom do whatever it can do with minimal dependence on the state to solve the problems. That was his dream scenario. But as he got deeper and deeper into his understanding of the system, he realized the power plants are in much worse condition than he had anticipated. And to solve that, he realized he was constrained by a whole bunch of regulations and political decisions. But it didn't need to go that way. I think that the centralization of core decision-making to drive a solution to the problem could have been within Eskom.
What do you think is the first most important thing that needs to happen now? And you've mentioned the myriad problems, the myriad centres of power. But in order to get us out of this current crisis, I know you said already we've got to get used to 4, 5 and 6, but just in terms of the current problem with this lack of diesel, with the issues that we're having, what should the new CEO coming in do as a first priority? Because I'm wondering if the reality is that Andre de Ruyter's departure is not just a CEO leaving, but perhaps a sign that the centre of power and the philosophy around power generation is changing once more.
Well, the most urgent priority while de Ruyter is still in place and the other executives through to the end of March is to raise enough funding to buy diesel to keep the diesel generators going So there's sufficient backup so that we stay below stage 4. It's a sad thing to say, but that is an urgent priority because we're not going to be able to fix the machines in the next 2 or 3 months to achieve the same result. So, and Eskom doesn't have the money. Treasury said they're not going to give Eskom the money, and so it's up to the public and private banks to find the money. But given what has just happened and Gwede Mantashe's statement last week, confidence levels are low. So that's the immediate challenge. But if coming to your question around what the CEO, incoming CEO should do, the incoming CEO should have a kind of manifesto, a kind of vision and a program and a set of conditions to accept the job that government needs to sign off on. And those sets of conditions need to give Eskom the requisite level of autonomy to act decisively and quickly so that it can make sure that many of these plans get implemented, including setting up the national transmission company without it being overloaded with debt so that it can raise the capital that needs to be raised in order to extend the grid so that you can get more renewables generating energy into the national grid so that you have the space to then fix the old power generators. So it's complex. It's a very complex system, but that manifesto needs to be drafted by a new CEO and stakeholders signed off on that.
Would you want the job, Mark?
I don't think anybody wants that job. Nobody wants that job. But we need to commend Andre de Ruyter. He has survived longer than the previous 11 CEOs of Eskom.
Good point. Thank you so much for chatting to us this evening. That was Professor Mark Swilling. He's a Professor of Sustainable Development and Co-Director of the Centre for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University.